All right, welcome everyone to the first edition of Performance Analytics Office Hours in 2020. Hope you all had a fantastic holiday break. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Tom Pasek. I'm going to take a quick minute here just to set up how we run these sessions, and then we'll jump into today's presentation. So first of all, we kick off each session with some content from our own teams. We have a list of upcoming topics that are posted in the community, so you can kind of see what future sessions might be coming up. We may change the topics or the dates that those get presented, but it should give you at least a decent idea of what's coming up. After those sessions, or after the content, we'll transition into an open Q&A forum. So you have the ability to ask questions. There is a Q&A feature in Zoom. So as our presenters are going along, feel free to go ahead and drop questions in that are related to that content. And then afterwards, we'll try and circle back on any Q&A that might cover additional topics. So feel free to listen in, but it's your opportunity to get some questions answered. Everyone should be muted by default. If we're getting into a hairy situation on a question, we might ask you to go off mute and add some audio if that's okay with you. And there may also be scenarios where if we're getting into the specifics of your particular instance and configuration, we might just ask you to follow up offline and raise an incident on high, just in the interest of time to make sure we can get to all the questions that are going on. Last reminder for me, these meetings are being recorded. So if you're not comfortable with that, or your organization is not comfortable with that, please go ahead and disconnect. And speaking of recordings, this handy URL here will take you to a YouTube playlist of all of the previous sessions. So if there was a session that you missed or want to go ahead and play back just because you loved it so much, you always have that ability there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter for today, Adam Stout, who's going to cover reporting best practices. All yours, Adam. While Adam's pulling that up, actually, I have one last note I was going to point out. If you haven't seen in the community, there's a post also pinned to the top there. Kind of right around the holidays, we released a new app to the ServiceNow store called KPI Composer. So that post there will detail kind of what's under the hood, but the short version there, it's a great new way to kind of graphically connect your KPIs to business outcomes and objectives. So you can build a visual map there of kind of what you're aiming for with your performance management strategy. So we'll get into more details on that on future sessions, but be sure to check it out.
And Tom, are you seeing the presentation now?
Yes, we've got that now.
Great. Okay, so let's get started. There's a lot to cover in here, so we're going to go a little bit quick. The main goal I have for today is to expose you to some of the best practices. This deck will get posted when the recording does tomorrow or sometime later this week. There's a couple articles in the community already about this, but I just wanted to take a few minutes to go through and make sure you open your eyes to anything that you might be missing. So there's a link in here to the best practice article that's there today. Most of these things are there. A couple of things aren't. But if you want to reference this, it's in the community now. Things we're going to talk about are building for performance, and then a couple of things we want to avoid, and we'll get into some of the tuning for performance. Tuning can be several hours talking about how you tune it. So we're going to talk about a couple of the things. You can read more about them later, but I want you to expose you to some of the tools you have available to improve the performance of your reporting. So let's talk about building for performance. Before we get into the specific features, there's a couple key things that we want to talk about. And the first thing is that analytics are part of the platform. We're talking about reporting best practices, but reporting best practices are going to include using the right feature of ServiceNow. So that might be performance analytics, it might be metrics, reporting, there might be some application development, and there's always some case where we need to modify our process. All of these things are part of reporting best practices, of performance analytics best practices. Forcing the solution in the wrong feature and the wrong tool is going to cause you a lot of problems. So make sure you're always open to understanding, how do we solve this? Each one of these things accomplishes different use cases. So make sure you understand why I would do them, what you wouldn't use for them, and then go from there. Next part about it is your organization structure matters as well, right? You want to talk about reporting best practices. We got to make sure we're doing the right thing. So traditionally, this is what we see when we talk to customers, with especially with a lot of other tools. You have your sysadmins on one side, analytics developers on the other, your app developers, the process owners. They talk to each other, but they don't all talk to each other, right? I talk to my left side and my right side, but we're not working as a team. ServiceNow and reporting and performance analytics needs a different model. We need to all work together. We all have the same customers. We all have the same users. We all do different things. There's certainly overlap here on who can do things, like who can create a database view, who defines a new metric, who has the metric admin role. But it is important that we all work together to meet those needs. You cannot just say analytics developers solve this problem, because sometimes that means a process change. Sometimes it needs an app change. Sometimes you just need something done administratively. So make sure you know who these people are. You're talking to these people. In a small company, it might be the same person. It's possible. In a large company, it might be 4 distinct teams. A lot of times it's somewhere in the middle. But make sure you understand who does what, and that you're talking to them to solve the use cases that come up. All right, that's enough about that in your structure. Let's talk about the reporting best practices. So the first thing is, let's see if we can avoid doing any work whatsoever. That's always my goal. As we go through, we got to make sure that, again, that we're configuring our applications. There's a long rant on this that I have in the community if you want to read more about it. But the biggest thing that we want to look at is you cannot go back in time and just report on things. That's what we do when we export all of our data out to a data warehouse. We might try to reanalyze how things are going. Make sure that you're building your application for analytics. The biggest thing I hear is that it's just a reporting field. I don't need it. But if it's just a reporting field, why wouldn't you use it in the rest of your process? Again, we're part of the application. Analytics are part of the application. Make sure your application is part of your analytics. There's lots of different places we can use those analytics. There's a list of some of them here. Think about that. How do we ensure that what we're reporting on is what the application looks like? We don't want to deviate from that, because then we can't actually improve our application, improve our process, improve the outcomes for the business. The next part is, let's avoid doing work. So content packs. There are lots and lots of content packs out there that come out with every new release. There's new content packs. They're coming out mid-release in the store as well. They're available for every product line we have. And a key thing to think about is, it may not meet 100% of your needs, but it's going to get you close. It's going to save you time. The business units that are developing the products, that are developing GRC, that are developing HR, that are developing CSM, developing ITSM, they develop the analytics to go with them. Use those. Before you start from scratch, look at the content packs that are out there. Every release, I expect everybody on this call to go through the available content packs, see what's new, and see how you can leverage it. It might meet exactly what you're looking for. It might get you 70% of the way there. It might do things that you hadn't thought about yet. Take a look at those out of the box content packs. They are tuned. They're highly reviewed. Best practices are included. So always look at what's there first before you start to build something new. And then when we start to build something new, let's take a look at the right visualization. So in ServiceNow, we have several different types of visualizations. They're not all the same. They don't all do the same thing. So I want you to make sure you're thinking about this persona. If I'm building a dashboard, this dashboard will help this persona accomplish this objective. This report is going to help this persona see this. So make sure you understand, are we trying to do a comparison between values? Are we looking at just the current state? Do we want to see the composition of the data that we're going through? Think about what you're trying to help your user see, then pick the right visualization for that. Right now, if I look at many customer sites, I see lots of list views. I see lots of pivot charts and single scores. Those are probably the 3 biggest things we see. But realistically, you need to know more about what the person is trying to do so that you can help them. That's going to be key as we go along as well. Understanding what the person is trying to do, what your user is trying to do, is key. That also means you might have multiple tabs, you might have multiple dashboards for the same persona to do different objectives, or for the same objective for different personas, because they need to see different things. Don't try to be an end-all be-all. Okay, now let's get into some more of the features that we want to go through. All of these should have a link to the documentation below. We're not going to spend a ton of time on each one of these, but I do want to make sure that you're aware that they exist. So just the list of things we're going to talk about: report sources, filters, data sets, drill downs. We talked about those a couple of weeks ago. Additional group buys, and some content blocks. So let's talk about them quickly, what they do. Report sources. I don't mind if individual users create reports on their tables, but for my curated dashboards, for my curated reports, the things that my team owns, I want to use report sources. And report sources allow me to have a name set of conditions. They don't pre-aggregate the data. The performance is actually the same as if you query it on the table. That is not what's important. What's important is that it's a better user experience, because now I don't have to know the table name. I can give it a very user-friendly name, like recently, like elevated incidents, high priority incidents, VIP cases. So I can give it an easy name for people to look at what's there, and I can tune those conditions. So some of the things we'll go through have to do with how you structure the conditions. It's not incredibly important if I run one report once a quarter, but if I'm running a single report hundreds of times a day or thousands of times a day, you want to make sure that it's as optimized as possible. The report source allows you to say, these are the conditions that we use for that. So you do want to be looking at how do we use report sources more, and get off direct table reports and more into the report sources so that you can control what's going on. Next is dynamic filter options. The key with report sources, I have less things to tune. Dynamic filter options are the same. Less reports means I have less things to tune. So instead of having a report that is, what are Tom's open incidents? What are Adam's open incidents? What are Joe's open incidents? I can just say open incidents for is dynamic me. It's an awesome feature. Been around for many years. Wasn't around when I started, but I love this feature. So you're able to take, for any reference field, at the bottom of the list, you'll see is dynamic me for users. Really useful. It's evaluated JavaScript to understand who the user is. A key note for this is if it doesn't meet your needs, you can write new ones. As an administrator, you can create new dynamic filter options so that they can do what they want to do. Whatever the case is, there's a lot of them out of the box, me, my groups, but maybe you need something that's more than that. This allows you to put in that logic to make a great user experience, but it can also help tune performance. And again, it will let you have less reports. Fewer reports are better reports because you have less things to manage. Fewer things to manage. We'll go with that. Interactive filters, the same token. So on a report, I might have it be is dynamic me, but I might want to be able to browse high priority incidents or incidents assigned to my team. Using interactive filters, I can use the same report and allow the user on the dashboard to change what they're seeing. I don't have to have a report for high priority reports, low priority incidents, critical and high incidents. I can let the user configure that. This is a premium feature, so you do have to have Performance Analytics Premium for what you're using the interactive filters on. But assuming most people here do have Performance Analytics, great feature you need to be using. You can create custom interactive filters as well. That's a much larger topic, but they can be done. We teach a session at Knowledge on that. And again, fewer reports are better reports. So let's go with multiple data sets. So we talked about this a couple sessions ago. This allows me to get higher data density, and I can see the data. I can see multiple data sets coming from the same table or different tables. They just have to be grouped by the same thing, whether it's a date or an assignment group or priority. It allows me to have take up less screen space and get more information from there. This really does require you to understand, what does the person want to see? What are they going to compare it with? If I know that they're going to want to see the open incidents compared to the open changes, or closed incidents to closed changes, or open incidents to closed changes, I know that that's what they want to see. I can put that in the same report in context so they can clearly see what's going on. And then the sister feature to that are drill downs. Drill downs allow me to, when I understand they're going to see this, and if this is exciting, they'll want to see that. Drill downs allow me to focus in on that data. So I see a big number. When I see the high number of incidents for this priority, I want to know who's working on them. I can click on it to drill down to what's in there. Again, we're trying to reduce the number of reports and give them a better user experience so they don't have to dig and poke and scroll, change tabs. They just click what's intuitive for them. They see what they want to see and click in to get that next level of information and make it actionable. Another feature, not as commonly used, but a great feature with this is additional group bys. So when I group by a feature, in this case, we are grouping by priority, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's by default what the user wants to see, what this persona wants to see. I can add additional things, questions that aren't the first question they ask, but they're questions they do ask. So I can put in priority as the group by, but additional group bys I can put as category, as assignment group. As many as you want, you can put in there. That adds this little box at the bottom, which allows me to change the group by and the stack by for the reports where that matters. So I by default want to see priority, but now I can see priority and category. With just a click of the drop down, I can now see the data differently, reduce the number of reports. I have less things to tune. This is better for me. It's better for the user. And content blocks. I like using content blocks. You do have to have, this is not a premium feature, but you need to have content admin to be able to do this on the instance. You can add more context. So we have all our reports, but let's say I want to add a list of links. I want to add some headers. I want to put a service catalog item so they can do something directly in there. Anything that's in the platform, that's in a UI page, you can put into a content block. In this case, we see an example of some help. We see some links to get people doing what they need to do. Again, I know the persona, this persona needs to do these things. Let's give them a list of links to do that right away from where they're looking at. There's an article that walks through more of how to do these things in here. Great feature. I don't want all my users doing this all the time, but again, for those curated dashboards where I'm giving them, I want to give my users a great experience, content blocks help fill out that functionality for me. Okay, those are the good things. I want to make sure you're using all those features. Let's talk about a few key things that we do want to avoid. Those are group by lists on large data sets, hard coding dates, calculated fields, and PA scripts. And I understand we're talking about reportings, but don't use PA scripts. So avoiding group by lists. Again, I see a lot of list views and people do group bys. What this is actually doing in the background is your first list that gets me all the values. So in this case, database, hardware, all my incident categories. But then it has to do queries in the background to get the first 20 of each one of those things. When you have a lot of group bys or the query is slow, this can be a huge performance hog. So I normally don't want to see this at all, unless you know the data set is really small or there's very few categories that are going to happen. So if you know it will always be safe, it's okay. That's why we allow it. It is useful, but be aware that this can be causing you a lot of headaches. A couple things I don't like is that the first thing is the group by. So in this case, if I'm looking at the requests, if you can see the number here, there's 3,000 requests. I'm only seeing 20 of them. If I actually want to see all 3,000, I have to click on it and open that list up. So it doesn't really give you what you're looking for. It's not sorted. Generally, when I want to see it, I want to see it by the impact, by the number of these things. It's sorted alphabetically, or it's sorted how it would normally sort. So it's not really giving me what I want, and it's a performance hog. So instead of that, I normally go one of two routes. One is to use a bar chart, or I don't know, bar chart, some grouping chart, which will be incredibly faster. From that, I will also see the distribution, so I will know request is the biggest one and be able to click on that and use a drill down. So I'm going to use a bar chart with a drill down. If that's not what I want, I actually do want to see a list view. Instead of doing the group by, I'll do a sort. And again, that just lets me, I can scroll through and see what I want to see, and I see all the records in my list view rather than just the first 20 or 50. This is governed by the personal setting about how many records you see in a list view. That's the number that shows up here. So when I often look for slow reports that are list views with a group by, I want to get rid of those. If they're showing up in a second, it's okay. But my first hit list in performance tuning is to look at report stats and get the any reports that take longer than 5 or 10 seconds that are list views that have a group by. We're definitely going to target those and convert them to either the bar chart with the drill down or the sorted list. Hard coding dates, not as common, but I still see it. This is a lot of what we see, and when we just forklift reports over, just don't hard code dates. You want to make sure you're using the condition builder to use this month or between or relative. There are lots of different options to get the dates. It almost always meets the needs that I see all those use cases. Use these so that I don't have to have a Q3 incident backlog and a Q4 incident backlog. If I do want to compare the last 4 quarters and 4 reports on a dashboard, I'll create 4 reports, this quarter, last quarter, 3 quarters ago. I might have to use some different conditions to get that to work. The relative, again, is really useful. But then they'll slide with me, and I don't have to update the dashboard, update the reports all the time. I don't want to see hard-coded dates. This isn't a performance thing, but it's just, it comes out to be a performance thing because I now have lots of legacy reports that are there that are just mucking up the waters. And calculated fields. Don't use calculated fields. That's all you need to know. If you want to know why, you can read it here, but they will cause you headaches. They're a performance drain. They also might give you effectively wrong results because it's not saving what you're seeing. When you query, this is the big issue with them. When you query a calculated field, it's querying the last value when the record was updated. So something like age is just not touched. It's not giving you what you think it should be. Now, if I look at name on sysuser, people's names change so infrequently that it's going to actually be right. But outside of that, it's just not going to give you what you want. It's going to recalculate when you view it. So it's calculating every time you view the record, even though it's not when you're querying it. So you get very kind of appearing to be inconsistent results. We know exactly what's happening, but what's happening is probably not what you want it to happen. The way I get around this is use function fields. Function fields are very different than calculated fields. Calculated fields are JavaScript on the app node. Function fields are on the database side. There's less, you're constrained as to what you can do with the function field, but the performance is fine. And you don't have the calculation querying issue. What I actually prefer to do most of the time is to create a new field with a business rule that changes. So when my like assignment count or name even is actually better to say when first name, middle name, or last name changes, calculate and store the full name. Don't do it every time I view the record. So don't use calculated fields. And then PA scripts, this is on here because it goes with it. PA scripts are designed for things that are date dependent with score start and score end. I should not see PA scripts that don't have score start or score end in them. This really goes back to design my application to have these things. There's a lot into this. We won't get into detail, but performance analytics scripts are a lot like calculated scripts in terms of the performance hit. It's calculated at the right time, but it is a performance hit. And more importantly, if I have a PA script, I can't use it in reporting. And I want to use it in reporting the vast majority of the time. I want to use it for machine learning. I want to use it for lots of things. So unless I have score start or score end, you really take a look at, can I not use the script and can I just add a new field or somehow have my system calculate this for me? Maybe I'll use a view to do some joins or whatever needs to happen. But performance analytics scripts are not only a performance drag on you, but they also are robbing the value that you can get from the rest of the platform. Okay, let's talk about performance tuning. Again, a lot in here, but I want to open your eyes to what's there. You can follow up on it later. So performance tuning, report stats, I mentioned that before, slow queries, index suggestions, limiting the row count, looking at indexes and conditions. Let's go in through these quickly. So report stats, there is a table called report stats that tracks every report. It's a one-to-one with report that tracks the last 25, the default is 25 runs of it. And it stores how long did it take, how many times has it been run cumulatively, when was the first time it ran, when was the last time it ran. So a summary of statistics. But this allows me, this is essential when I'm doing report tuning. I don't tune reports that haven't been run in the last 90 days. I don't care. So I might have 10,000 reports, but only 1,000 have been run in the last 90 days. I've now removed 90% of my work. I don't have to look at those. I'm now just going to look at the ones run in the last 90 days, 60 days, 30 days. It doesn't identify who ran the report, but it's very, very useful to understand which reports, how I want to prioritize tuning those reports. Things that are run, been run 100,000 times, and take a minute to run each time, that is going to have some level of system impact. I want to go tune that. That's where I want to go convert things to report sources. That's where I want to convert the grouped by list to a bar chart. Report stats is very important. Report admin can see this. Many of the other things we're going to talk about, you got to be an admin. So this is really good on a sub-prod, on production. Again, make friends with your admin, buy them some donuts or something. So slow queries. This is system-wide, which is why you need to be an admin, is not specific to reporting, but your report queries will show up here. It logs every slow query. I think it's over a tenth of a second. There's a system property that determines what slow means. From here, I can see I can see the explain plan. That's really important when you want to do some tuning. If you're changing indexes or changing fields or whatever the case may be, you can look at the explain. So those of us with a SQL background, with database background, you can see what the plan is. And it's just like any other tuning. You can go in. You'll actually be able to see the SQL that's there as well, and you can modify that. It does parameterize things when it's preparing things. So it is grouping similar queries together. So if I look at Tom's open incidents and Adam's open incidents, it should group those together and see that's the same query. The next is index suggestions. So there's an index suggestion wizard that goes through from slow queries. I can say, I want to see what the suggestions are. This will then set up a job to look for the next 2 weeks at a certain query and with a pass that are actually taken, and then it will suggest indexes. You have to be admin to do this. Do read up on how it works. From here, these are suggestions. You always still want to test them in a subprod, in a representative subprod to verify the recommendation is actually effective. You don't add an index that doesn't change the plan, that's not actually used, but it can be really helpful to get started in performance tuning. Limiting the row count user preference. This is something an admin has to do. This is how many records come back on a view. I think 20 is the system default. 20 is a good number. Users can go in and change this to a bigger number, but the more records you have per page, that's every query in the list view, is pulling back that many records. That's how many references it has to look up, all the dot walking you're doing. It's okay, but 20 is a good number. If people increase this, or if your admin actually added more records to it that allowed you to do 1,000, it's going to be a poorer user experience for that user. And with enough users doing it, you'll see, you might see a performance degradation. Using existing database indexes. So this is key as well. When I'm looking at a report and I want to tune it up, this is again where report sources really come into it. We see cases where people say state equals open. Well, state is a choice field, and by default, choice fields are not indexed. So if I do incidents and I have 1 million incidents and I'm doing state equals open, it has to scan 1 million incidents. But if I leave state equals open and I add active equals true, active is indexed, and now my query is only looking at active incidents, which might be a tenth of it. Maybe I have 100,000 active incidents out of 1 million incidents. I now have reduced the data I have to scan from 1 million to 100,000, and you will see it get 10 times faster. Again, if one user does it, I don't care, but if I have those reports that are running 1,000 times a day, that's where I want to use that report source and make sure the report source for open incidents is actually looking for state equals open and active equals true. It's counterintuitive, but there are absolutely cases where adding more conditions will speed up the query. Normally you'd expect the opposite, but it can be true. If you look, again, as an admin, and I like to have admin on at least a subprod or on a subprod, I can go in and look at what indexes are there, and then I might be able to see there's an equivalency. So I've seen a case where reopened, they have a reopened on incident, reopened the last 90 days, not indexed. Full table scan. But one of the things that I know of, there's equivalences to say, well, you can't reopen it without updating it. And sys updated on is indexed on this particular table. So by saying reopen in the last 90 days and updated and sys updated on in the last 90 days, I now am able to greatly reduce the scan to things that have been updated in the last 90 days that also are reopened. So I get the exact same results, but much faster. This is the preferred path. Before I add new indexes, I'm going to see if I can just use the indexes that are there. If I can't, I might add indexes, but this is where I want to look at the reports I want to tune, look at the indexes, look at my slow queries, and understand, does this now get me faster? for a bit of reference in your mind, reference fields are always indexed. They're indexed by default. You have to go in and drop the index, which only ServiceNow can do. Choice lists are not indexed by default, but there absolutely are cases where you would want to go add an index on a choice list. We are limited to 64 indexes per table. And I believe that you cannot drop an index. Only ServiceNow can drop an index. You can add an index though. So be careful, read some more about this. It's definitely something you want to do in a subprod. And again, the first thing I want to do is just, can I leverage an existing index before I add a new index? And operators matter. Related to the index, operators matters. Is the fastest you can do. Is the fastest. Next, this starts with, I have to scan the data, but at least I can get to where I want to go to. I might be able to take advantage of an index. And then contains is just not as fast. It's the slowest you can get because it must do a full table scan. It must read all the data that comes through. So if it's possible, use an is starts with. But one of the things I often see is contains or a header, an incidence. Short description starts with. If you're doing that and that's part of your business, consider adding a business rule, a new field that adds a category, a derivative category that's maybe not on the form, but a business rule looks at the short descriptions and then sets the category. And by doing that, I can now do is whatever the category is, whatever that choice list is. I can add an index on that possibly, but I don't want to scan all the data. I don't want to have my, again, those reports that I run 1,000 times a day doing it contains. I don't want to do that. If you are using a list, it's always doing it contains. And that's something where, again, you might want to modify your system. If I'm always looking for something in a list, maybe I want to create a shadow table, which breaks those things apart. You can have the same user experience, but a better structure underneath to support analytics. And it goes back to that first slide about building your application to support your analytics. But if we can use an is, use is, then starts with, then contains. And limit unneeded fields. This kind of goes along with the row counts that are there. If you really don't need something, then don't include it. If it's on the same table, it doesn't matter. But if you're dot locking extra fields, you're putting in, especially a reference field, you put a reference field that you don't really need, then there's an extra join involved. It's going to slow you down. If you need it, do it. But again, don't just add everything to your list. Don't add everything to your list view report if it's really not used. Okay, and wrapping up from all the things that we've talked about, a couple of the key things are design your application, have persona-based analytics that address those specific use cases for your business, for what matters to you, and make sure your application supports that. Fewer reports are better reports. When you have 100,000 reports, if you have 10,000 reports, no human can go through and look at all those things. But if I know and looking at my report stats, I only have 100, I can look at 100. That's manageable. So fewer reports are better reports. And then make sure you are monitoring the usage that things run smoothly. I am not a fan of blocking people from doing things. I want my users to be able to go create their one-off reports. But let's monitor it and see if one of those one-off reports got shared to a department, got shared to 1,000 people that are now all running it. Well, now I see this report is running a lot. I'm going to spend some resources. I'm going to spend a few minutes and take a look at how do I tune it? How do I look at all these best practices and make sure those reports that are frequently run are using as many best practices as possible. If you have any questions on this, the Q&A is open, so we can talk about these things. And then outside of that, post them in the community. If you have a question about how do I do this, post those questions in the community, include some screenshots when you can. I monitor the community, I'll reply, but there's a lot of other really smart people on the phone today and out in the ecosystem who are happy to discuss those as well. And that way you're not just learning, but everybody else is learning. All right, let's go to Q&A. The first thing we'll do is answer some questions that have to do with the things we talked about today, and then we'll open it up and answer anything else we have if we have time. Okay, so first question I see has to do with upgrades and content packs. So upgrades are challenging. I can only say that they're challenging right now. We are working on this. Um, some of the content packs you'll be able to see in the solution library. So if you go into the solution library, which you should see in your nav bar, you'll be able to look at what's there, and you can upgrade piece at a time, whether it's an indicator source or not. We don't upgrade your analytics when you upgrade to New York or to Orlando, because you use your analytics. We can change a business rule. It's generally okay, but I can't change the underlying definitions of how you look at data. We're not comfortable doing with that. Only you can do that. What I suggest if you're upgrading is go look at the docs, go look at the release notes, see what's new. Go spin up a developer instance and very clean instance, install that content pack and see what's there. And one of the things that you can do is just recreate that, or you can export the XML from the content pack on the dev instance and put it into your sub prod and then prod. There's not a great way yet of just saying, I want to upgrade the new features. It will add new stuff, but the biggest problem we have with upgrades is changes. So let's say we were changing an indicator source. We will not change an indicator source from underneath you, particularly because you might have customized that. You might have added a new condition or removed a condition, and that's important to you. So then you get to this weird situation about changing parts of it. So for every release, I recommend everybody here, go look at the documentation. All the new stuff is very well documented. What persona is it for? What reports are on it? What indicators are in it? Everything you want to know is there. And then you can never, if that's interesting to you, spin up a dev instance, which are free, right? Go to the developer.servicenow.com, spin it up, activate the content pack, take a look at it, play with it, see what's there. Maybe it's something you can just change to what you have, or maybe you can just export it and import it in as well. This is something we're actively working on to make that a better experience, but it's just logically challenging to understand what you want and what you don't want. Okay, so then next one related to this has to do with converting slow running reports to PA. It depends. It depends. So a slow running report I see very commonly is multiple data sets that has to do with number of incoming or new problems, closed problems, new incidents, closed incidents for the last 2 years. And if you do that, you have to scan lots of data. And those things do not change. PA is absolutely a better fit for that. Do convert them to PA if it makes sense. What I don't want to see people do is just convert to PA just so they can use formulas. And I certainly see, or so they can use scripts. That's where it comes from. Fix your application. Make your application store the data in a way that you use it, that you can use it analytically. Make sure it's storing it the way you want to see it. So I'm more in favor of fixing your application so that it reports quickly. As an example, I've certainly seen the PA scores table have 1 billion records, 2 billion records, and it will still report back sub-second because it's indexed in the right way, the way we access their data. So understanding your users, understanding their use cases, and then making sure your application analytics support those use cases, you shouldn't have slow running reports. And then we get into indexes to make sure that's true. I'm a much bigger fan of doing that than just converting it to PA to be fast. And I know people say that, but I think you end up with a lot more problems than you're solving, right? You're not addressing the root causes. Our data's not structured the right way. It's not indexed the right way. We're not using the indexes that are there. Okay, that it looks like it's all the questions about reporting best practices. So I see another one in here that I'm going to address. If anybody else has anything else, you can throw it in the Q&A and we'll get to it. So I have a question in here that I will try to answer. It's a bit long. My requirement is to see breakdowns when a particular breakdown is selected. So, and all the breakdowns are manual breakdowns. So I get very concerned with all my breakdowns are manual breakdowns. That's not going to set us up for success, but we'll go from there. We have a breakdown dividing mobile devices into Android and iPhone. Okay, and there are breakdowns for the iOS version on the iPhone. So when I select the breakdown element of iPhone, I only want to see the breakdowns for iOS versions. So what that's describing to me is a breakdown relation. Manual is just not going to work. You don't. Manual is for quick POCs, realistically. what I'd want to see here is that I'm loading these versions into a table somewhere. That gives me a sys-ID. Again, it allows me to report on it as well. And once it's there, I can set up a breakdown relation with parent-child. So maybe I want to see my iPhone major version and then the minor version, or anything like that. I mean, that's certainly very common in a lot of things that we see. And I believe there's some tables to store some versions of those things. I mean, we use them in the catalog, we use them in SAM. So I don't know enough about some of the structures where I would put them, but worst case, I'd create a custom table that had those. Then my system, my scripts my tables would reference those versions. So it would take the string that comes in from those and then put them, identify what the reference field is. And then I can have a normal breakdown. It's not a manual breakdown. It would be an automated breakdown. And I can use a breakdown relation. Breakdown relation is where you can see parent-child relationships. When we did a session late last year on hierarchies that talks about breakdown relations, I would go back and look at that. We'll do a knowledge session on it as well, and hierarchies and versions are certainly a hierarchy. And then there's documentation on breakdown relations. So that's where I would go. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, so you can ask them now if you have anything in there. If not, we can wrap up early. And I do want to make a plug, by the way. In Now Learning, there is a new training session that got posted, I believe, earlier this year, I think last week, on performance analytics formulas. A great self-paced free training on performance analytics formula overview, I believe is what it's called. There's a link to it if you're in the community and you go to the article we have on all the training available. You'll see that added there. If you go to Now Learning directly, you can search for formulas and it comes up at the top. I believe it's the first one. But a great free self-paced training on PA formulas. PA formulas are awesome, very powerful, very efficient. Big fan of those. I hate scripting, but the formulas are not scripting. They're very powerful for you. And it walks you through a lot of the features that you don't get in some of the other training. So once you've taken really PA fundamentals, PA advanced somewhere in there, go take that training. You can take it ahead of time as well before you take those, but at least make sure you've taken PA essentials, have an understanding of what formulas kind of do. And then it'll walk you through all the advanced use cases and all just kind of the different options you have. Okay, and there's a follow-up question about the breakdown relations. The breakdown relations, if you want to see how to do that as an example, I would go back, if you go look at the office hours page, you'll see a link to the deck that explains it. And then there's the recording on the YouTube channel, which is you'll find in the community as well, that walks you through it's the hierarchies presentation we did. It walks you through how to set it up. And again, lots of documentation on that. It still comes through. Manual breakdowns is not something you actually want to use in production. It's there, but what you're describing shouldn't be manual. You should, when you load the data, you should load that into a real table. When you start using manual breakdowns and manual indicators for that matter, to some extent, but definitely manual breakdowns on automated indicators are a problem. That you shouldn't do that. You need to figure out how, when you're loading the data, you can load that data into a real table. You're going to find a lot more use out of it. Life will be much easier for you. But manual breakdowns are kind of by definition something that we don't work with a lot. Similar issues if you load Excel data into reporting, it's just going to cause you a lot of headaches. It's fine for one-off. It's fine for something being quick, but it's a challenge outside of that. Okay. Sorry, there's follow-up to that about the, let me see if I can. Tom, do you know how to turn on or unmute the
attendees?
Yeah.
Yeah, here.
Thank you.
I have the ability to talk.
There we go. So for the string field, this is a follow-up question about the string fields. When you have a string field, this comes into designing your application. So what I'd expect is that this data is probably coming in from an import set somewhere. It's getting pushed in somehow, I hope, or it's a log file. If it's getting pushed in the transform map that's loading it, it's just a simple setting to be able to say, this is a reference field, and then it will go create anything that comes in. Because something like iOS version, there's only so many versions, right? There's not billions of versions. Even if there were millions, it'd still be okay. You have a table and say this string field is a reference to the version field over here, and there's an option to just say if it doesn't exist in that table, create one, and it will create it to handle the reference. The import sets are really useful. Coming back to this, I see this a lot when I hand it over the app creation to somebody, and they create the app, and they, especially people not heavily experienced with ServiceNow, load string fields. String fields are just effectively not reportable, right? They're not. The string field is like short description. It's something you wouldn't want to report on. So don't put something you do want to report into a field that's difficult to report on. So the import set can do it. I recommend everybody take this ServiceNow fundamentals class. 3-day class, but man, it will really help you understand what ServiceNow can and cannot do and how to accomplish your goals. What's easy and what's not easy. I believe it's still an instructor-led training right now, but I believe that sometime this year, that's going to become a self-paced learning. You want to learn how to do that because basically you don't want to load string fields. You want to load it in as a reference field, and then PA will be much easier. But again, the same thing happens when I talk about machine learning, reporting, PA, everything becomes easier when it's built in a way that kind of built in the ServiceNow way. So we want to avoid string fields for things I definitely want to break down, things I want to break down by, because the only way you end up doing it is with a breakdown sandwich, and breakdown sandwiches are absolutely something you don't want to see in production. They're very problematic. It's great for a demo. It's great for I have to have this working today, but it's not a long-term solution. Okay, another question came in. So a few minutes. Real-time data and performance analytics is discouraged. However, it makes one look incompetent when a record updated doesn't reflect immediately in PA widget because the job runs the next day. What's the best way to get a customer to understand PA may not provide real-time data? Well, it's a great question, and it depends on the personas that come through. So real-time data, discouraged, it depends on the use case. I wouldn't say it's discouraged all the time. It's discouraged for use cases where it doesn't matter. So things like the number of incoming incidents monthly, that doesn't need to be real-time. My number of P1 incidents, I absolutely would turn on to real-time. Just understand that it is running that query. This also comes into if I have scripts and other stuff, it may not be able to run real-time. If the more complicated it is, it's a problem. You're effectively layering, if you turn on real-time, you're layering in the trend and the report. Perfectly fine for the right use cases. Just make sure that it's needed when it's needed. With monthly, it's not a problem. With daily, we should be stamping in the date. But again, PA is about trending. If I'm looking at a frontline workers dashboard, somebody who just has to get incidents done, I'm rarely going to put any PA on it, right? Maybe I will, but it's going to be reports. It's all real time. But your CIO understands I'm looking at monthly numbers for last month. The number has to be done. So it's about understanding the use case and when you can do it and when you can't do it. If it needs to be real time, you gotta just make sure you're tuning it. So my preference, and maybe discouraged is the right word, is don't use it unless somebody asks for it. But if that persona needs it, use it. That's why it's there, right? It's there. Just do understand there is a performance cost. Don't turn it on just because. Make sure you understand that use case and you'll be okay. Getting users to understand that is certainly a challenge, but that's when I start out talking to users in dashboards, it's about understanding the persona. And this is the biggest challenge we have. It's not the technical side, it's the persona side. Somebody gives me a spread, I'm sure this has happened to many of us. Somebody gives me a spreadsheet, we've run this for the last 5 years. I want to see this in PA. I paid a lot of money for PA. Make it fast. Do it. the thing I have to know before I can build a good dashboard, a great dashboard, is what are you going to do with it? What are the key pieces of information you want to see? What are you asking? If you see this and it's a higher number, what are you going to do about it? What's your next question going to be? By understanding their goals and their real use case, not just I need to see this number, but what do you do with it? We're able to then go, well, let's put this drill down and let's put this multiple data sets in. This is a better fit for PA. Or you don't care about the trend, you only care about real time. So let's just do a report. We won't do the PA stuff. If I don't need to set up PA, all the better. Just use reporting. So you got to understand who is asking for this and why they're asking for it, so you can partner with them to create something great. Simply just doing what you're told is not to anybody's benefit. It's nobody's benefit. Same thing happens for app design too. It's the same thing. If you don't understand what they're actually trying to do, then we have a problem. And the next step forward from this is, well, and it comes from all of us working together, right? The app developers, the process owner, the consumer, to go, well, if you want to do that, then why are you even looking at a report? Let's just make that a business rule so it does it for you, right? If this number's too high, automatically do this, right? We do that for escalations. We do that for SLA breaching. Let's think about what your actual goals are. The report is a tool that we use to get to our goal, but that's not a goal. So make sure you understand the customer's goals. And then once you start putting all those pieces together, we're going to understand, okay, well, you want to see, we want to see the trend. We're going to look at PA. Or no, we'll modify a business rule to do this. We'll change the UI action so this just never happens. I see a lot of reports that people are looking for exceptions because there's bad data. What do we do to prevent the bad data? That's the goal. I want to not have bad data. Been going back to actually what started at the very beginning. Tom talked about KPI Composer. Go take a look at the article on KPI Composer. The KPI Composer there's a tool that helps us understand our best practices for creating good KPIs that stack through all the levels and through all the traceability. We want to see that. If you are in a very reactive situation where somebody says, I want a report, and you just do a report, you're going to often use the wrong tool. I mean, because you're just kind of randomly guessing which one's there. This is the one I know. You really need to understand those goals and push them to those goals. Have the application do what you need it to do. Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions on there, and I'm about ready for a break. So we talked about the best practices. Again, those are documented in there. This presentation we'll post shortly. You'll see it in the community. You'll see a link on the office hours page where you see the topics, upcoming topics. You'll see a link to this presentation, as well as the ones, I think the last kind of 3 or 4 months. We have all those presentations in there. If you have questions between now and the next office hours, go into the community. Make sure you post some screenshots. It really helps. There's just an amazing amount of people. I've been so happy to see all the partners, all the customers answering questions. Where the ServiceNow people are there too, answering questions, but you're going to get an answer very quickly. You do not have to wait for the next office hours. So make sure you're doing that. If you haven't taken a look at the training page, go take a look at the training page again. There's some labs up there. There's lots of different things that are from self-paced to instructor-led. A lot of them are free to go help you understand, learn more about reporting, performance analytics, really everything in ServiceNow, but lots of great information for you. And Tom, I will hand it back over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Adam. I don't know if I have too much more to add, but we'll get the recording from today's session posted shortly. So look for that on the community. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Take care.